Hi, and welcome to RBP on JSB. I'm violinist Rachel Barton Pine, and today we're going to be discussing the first movement of Bach's Partita No. 3 in E major, the Preludio. By the way, if you want to hear a discussion about some of the general topics that pertain to all of the sonatas and partitas, please be sure to watch the overview episode. So the third partita of Bach is very French-inspired. We know this by the dance choices, by the spellings of the names of the dances, etc. In the Baroque era, the standard, kind of European general set of dances was Allemande, Courante, Sarabande, Gigue. And you'll notice in Bach's 6 cello suites, he uses these 4 movements in each of them, always as second, third, fourth, and sixth movements. So there's always a prelude. The cellists get 6, we only have 1. But then again, they don't have a chaconne, so we can't be too jealous. So it's always prelude, and then Allemande, Courante, Sarabande, and then either a pair of bourrées, minuets, or gavottes, and then ending with a gigue. Bach sticks to that pattern for all of his cello suites, but he really mixes it up for the violin partitas. Of course, we have our Allemande, Courante, Sarabande, bourrée with the doubles for the first one, and then our standard Allemande, Courante, Sarabande, gigue for our second partita with the big chaconne at the end. And then here we have no Allemande, no Sarabande, no Courante, and we have a gigue at the end, but in between we get gavotte and bourrée and minuet, plus a prelude, plus something else that the cellists don't get at all, a louré, a very rare movement. You don't find many lourés floating around at all, so it's not a dance that most people are familiar with. It's not a dance that's usually floating around. I mean, how many other lourés have you ever encountered? Like, probably none. Anyhow, because this is a very French-inspired partita, just to kind of lighten things up, of course, the French dance orchestras used very, very short little bows. You wouldn't use a bow that short to play solo music, but I do like to hold my bow higher if I'm using the Baroque bow, or even if you're using the modern bow, you might want to do the same thing. Now, granted, sometimes people hold their bows above the frog anyway in a Baroque bow, depending on the balance, and certainly if I'm using a Baroque bow on a gut-strung instrument, I might hold it in a variety of places depending on that particular stick, depending on the repertoire, etc. But generally when I'm using a Baroque bow on my modern violin for most Baroque music that I might play on this instrument, I'm going to be holding my bow more or less at the frog itself, just because, it's a kind of in-between type of situation to start with. But for this French suite, I do hold my bow a little bit higher, and it changes the sound. And this is especially nice if I happen to be playing more than one partita in the same concert, because it really makes this one sound fresh and different. So anyhow, back to the Preludio. This is really in the style of a French overture, an introduction to the dances, if you will. The beginning is actually sort of leading into the real starting point, which is measure 3. It's so tempting to do the old-fashioned grand entrance. And it took me years to kind of get that out of my system and realize, wait, why am I doing it? I'm only doing it because I always have done it, but why have I always done it? I can't think of a good reason. So I realized, wait a sec, this is lightness, and there's no downbeat when you start. It's da-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. So you almost have to feel the downbeat that doesn't exist and go, ba-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. And then, ya-da-da-da-dum. Clearly that's a gesture. Ya-da-da-da-dum. And then, dum, bum, bum, bum. And then you launch into your 16ths. So totally radical thing if you haven't ever thought of doing it that way before. But once you get used to it, you're like, oh, why didn't I always do it that way? See what I mean? It's just so charming when you have those couple of measures getting you there. And then, of course, here, very brilliant. Bach has many written-in echoes. There's the first one right there in measure 5. And definitely think about on the string, off the string, different types of bow strokes that might help you with your volume changes, just to make character changes as well. This one more extroverted. This one a little more cute. Now in measure 7, of course, he writes an F. And the F doesn't mean forte, because think about it, Bach's not using gradations. He doesn't, first of all, he uses hardly any dynamics at all as far as written dynamics. He uses harmonies and things, and sometimes even long slurs to imply dynamics, but he doesn't tell you a lot of gradations. So he's not telling you pianissimo, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, fortissimo. Of course they had all those, levels of volume in the Baroque era, every possible nuance, but Bach is just giving you a few broad strokes to guide you. So when it says go back to forte, that just means no longer an echo. It doesn't mean you have to go back to the same forte that you might have been in measure 3. And so I personally think that the next 2 bars that are then echoed, which is measure 9, is where the real forte is. And I feel like measures 7 and 8 are getting you to 9. So I kind of modify measure 7 to more of a mezzo forte. So you're coming back up from the echo, but you're not all the way back to true forte. Just makes things a bit more interesting. So let's start at the echo in 5. Now back to something. Then growing to hear it arriving again. And then here is an interesting phenomenon. So in measure 13, he has a forte on the second eighth note. And then an echo here in 15 on the second eighth note. Then a big forte for the barilage. Oh, I have to discipline myself to not just carry on because that's such a fun part. But I know you want to hear me talk about the point that I'm trying to make. So now let's look at the corresponding spot. So measure 62, he actually puts the forte return on the downbeat. I'll start 2 measures earlier at 61. And then a subito piano on the downbeat. Or, well, it doesn't say subito piano. Maybe you diminuendo to it, but that would be bizarre because I think the notes are going forward. And then piano on the downbeat. And then... So if you look at the manuscript, it's utterly clear. The first pair of forte piano in 13 is on the 8th note, the second 8th note, and the second pair on the exact same music, the forte and piano, are both on the downbeat. So was Bach, he looks precise, and each pair matches itself. So was he just being different times? Entirely possible, because the guy loved variety, and indeed that was the highest aesthetic in the Baroque period, to make things interesting and mix it up, not do things the same way twice. Or was it 2 pages later and he just kind of forgot? So let's see what we like. I was talking too much when I played it the first time, so I'm going to do it as it is in Bach's manuscript, and let's see if we like them. And then here's the next one. I don't know. They're each interesting. If there were no dynamics and I was just choosing my own, as of course you would if there weren't any, I would probably phrase all the way to the downbeat, da, because when you sing it, da 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 dum, ba da 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 dum, you want to finish that phrase, and to insert the piano as it is in 65 on the downbeat, da 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 da. It feels like you got interrupted. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Bach knows that you're expecting for the piano to come in on the second eighth, and he's going, oh, no, I'm going to put it an eighth note sooner and surprise you. Could be. Sometimes when I'm just feeling like homogenizing things, which I suppose I ought not to do, but my favorite solution is to actually alter both of them, put both of the fortes on the downbeat and put both of the pianos on the eighth, because I like the entrance of the forte to come more squarely. But that's probably probably not a good idea to do them the same way both times. And interestingly, when you get text editions, I should say supposedly text editions, published by famous publishers, sometimes the editors have chosen to make these two spots match, and as if they're correcting a mistake that Bach might have made. So always question what you see on the page, even in an text edition. It's useful to have a clean page that you can use as a jumping off point to then, be able to read the music more clearly and write in your own ideas, etc. The manuscript is just so scrunchy. But always do look at Bach's manuscript very, very carefully, because you might find little things like that the texts have maybe not been quite as accurate to the score as maybe they should have been. Okay, so that's that spot. Let's see if there's anything else to tell you about dynamics. Well, first of all, these variolage sections, the super fun part. Audiences love that part too. They always say, oh, it sounded like a whole choir of violins. As the notes are descending, I think that the music eventually diminuendos down, and that makes sense with what comes next. If you start from a lower point, the music kind of growing, then growing again, and obviously it swirls around a bit, and listening to your harmonies and things, but I think both variolage sections make sense to have a diminuendo. Ultimately, the second one ending up at 79 with a lower point makes a lot of sense also. There's another set of echoes besides the opening and the corresponding place. Of course, in this section, starting at 43, which should clearly be a forte so that it can be echoed. There is a wonderful fingered octave for you, so make sure you stick your elbow way out so that if you have a short pinky like me, you can reach that fourth finger. And then an echo. And here, you might, just like we did in measure 7, you might want to come back to not quite forte, like poco forte, right? Then a real forte here. And then if you like, an echo, even though it's slightly different bar. Then here, maybe poco forte. Forte. Piano in 58. And now we're definitely back to our forte, because we have a Bach piano. I think those dynamics that I just laid out are pretty standard. Most people do them, and I think they work very well, and nothing wrong with you doing them too. But of course, wherever there's not a true Bach dynamic, it's your opportunity to decide for yourself and see what you like. But make sure that you do something, that you think it through, and that you experiment and see what you like and make a plan. Another thing that I was shocked to discover that had been left out of a couple of the text editions that I owned is a couple of slurs that are clearly in Bach's manuscript. They're not a scribble or a smudge or some other thing. I mean, they are absolutely, without a doubt, slurs. And I'm talking about the first beat of measure 41, where there are two note slurs. Why had I never heard of these slurs before? Good thing I checked the manuscript. Now, it looks like kind of strange that there are slurs, because measure 39, no slurs. I mean, in the first beat, no slurs. Of course, they're in the second beat. No slurs in measure 40, first beat. And then slurs in the first beat of 41. But of course there are, because think about it. Bach has no slurs, and then the third time he does something different. That was such a typically Baroque, creative thing to do, to have the last one be a little different, so you're not doing it 3 ways the same. And it's almost like superimposing the values of later centuries upon music from 1720 if we think, well, we should delete those obviously wrong slurs because then he's being inconsistent. And he's like, wait, why are you making me consistent? I don't want to be consistent. So I now just love these slurs in the beginning of 41 because they're just interesting and it's not the same thing again. And I really play it up, kind of do maybe a little more gooey now. I mean, I guess you could do that too. Sometimes I even indulge in. So actually, these days, maybe just because they're such a new thing for me, I actually add them to 104, which is the corresponding place. So I'll start in 102. You could say, well, that's a little, radical to add a slur that Bach didn't write, but isn't it just as radical to remove one that he did write? And we've been doing that for so many years. Nobody plays the slurs in the first beat of 41, and everybody always should have been all along. So I think if I indulge in playing some slurs in the beginning of 104 for a few years, it's just sort of evening out the universe or something. But anyways, you can decide for yourself. But definitely, I don't think you should decide not to do the ones in 41 because, that's just not a kosher thing to do, to leave out Bach's slurs that are clearly in there. Now, the bowing right after it in 43... Now, a lot of people will do slurs at the beginning and ending. So that you have this more comfortable, down bow on the lower string, up bow on the upper string, as opposed to backwards, down bow, up bow, down bow, up bow. But, especially with a Baroque bow in your hand, it works just fine to do that inside-out bowing pattern and to not add slurs. And if it sounds a little chunky, see, the thing is, when you do the slurs, it sounds smoother. Kind of more elegant and easier. But the chunky version, after all, we're in, what is it? We're in C-sharp minor here. So that's, kind of an intense key. So maybe the chunkier version really does work. And, as long as it doesn't sound awkward or sloppy or, clunky, actually having a little bit of, articulation in there can actually help things. Having that, and it helps bring out the different voices too. So right there, I just mentioned we're in C-sharp minor. This piece does sort of go back and forth between major and minor by the time you get to the variolage section. Out of the variolage section, of course, you're still major, E major, that is, in 29, but then it quickly starts to morph to minor. C-sharp major, but F-sharp minor, and then it's minor, minor for quite a while. So that should just be more intense and, make sure that you notice that it's become minor. And then, of course, notice where it stops being minor. So here we're still in C-sharp minor in 51. Then F-sharp 7. B major. So now it's still full. This one was so that's kind of a dark. And then B major. Also loud and bright, but in a happier kind of way. And ultimately ending up on A major, which it stays in for a little while. Same kind of scheme coming out of the variolage. You're in A major still in 79, but then it starts to become minor, and it stays minor for a while, all the way till 109. And so you have your F-sharp minor cadence in, measure 107. And then right away, back to E major, and then to B major, and then it goes twisting around with different keys. But that's a big cadence moment, so make sure that you take quite a bit of time and really let yourself finish the one mood and then change the mood. So brows knitted, right? And then the smile returns, the brow smooths. So let's see, how much time is too much time? Let's see. Yeah, you can take quite a bit of time, and it really works nicely and also breaks up. You don't want this movement to turn into some kind of perpetual motion. People who play it fast, fast, fast to show off that they can play fast. It's like, if you want to play a perpetual motion, get out your Novacek, get out your Paganini, get out your Ries. Why are you going to turn this beautiful Bach piece into a perpetual motion just to indulge yourself? It's a beautiful piece of music and has all these interesting slurs and harmonies, and it's not supposed to just be about showing off the fact that you can play fast. That's totally not its point. And so these moments when you can let the music breathe, that really brings it back from just sounding like some kind of an exercise or just running. So the other thing that makes it so much more interesting than just being a perpetual motion is the polyphony. What polyphony, you might say? There are no chords except at the very end. Well, there are all these other voices happening. Of course, this very large section sounds like a whole choir. Audiences can kind of hear the three strings sounding like an ensemble of violins. But then there's other places like, of course, you've got your bass notes starting in measure 43, and you have to kind of imagine that G-sharp pedal is going the whole time. So you don't just flick it like it's one of the 16th notes. It's so much more important than that. So if you just played it like a random note, but instead you have to play it as if kind of go down into the string. I'm squeaking today. Go down into the string as if that note is going to resonate. It's not even a pitch that does ring very well, but you just have to fake it. And then that's another voice. And in fact, we had a dialogue going all the way back to 39. These guys. And there's your bass note. So make sure they don't get lost in the... But... So there's just lots of different dialogue going on, and this stuff can have a little bit different character than so. And then the slurs take over in the middle voice. See, maybe there is a point to those slurs in 41, because now that we're thinking about it polyphonically, voice, middle voice, upper voice, middle voice, upper voice, middle voice, and then the middle voice has slurs leading into a B2 that is not given to the upper voice. So in fact, measure 41 is a very different animal than the two that preceded it. So the fact that Bach bows it very differently, I think he really meant it. And then, of course, lower voice enters, and then lower voice, etc. So lots going on there. And then, of course, we have some of our dialogue, like at measure 57, and then the answer from the lower voice. So they have a little exchange over there. Let's see. There's the same stuff, of course, here. 102 that we already talked about. There's also an interesting pattern of notes that goes starting in 94. So that doesn't happen anywhere else, and it's important to bring it out. So it's a little hard to control at first. It kind of made my brain feel twisty and my fingers start to stumble when I first started breaking out the first note of every group of 4 to bring out that line. But now that I do it, it just makes so much sense. And so much nicer than just playing the note straight. And of course some phrasing to go with. Dum bum bum, feeling like you're leading. Dun 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 da 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 dum ba da 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 dum. And really shaping those lines. And of course we have some bass notes starting in measure 115. Then your big bass note. And then 119, kind of pedal notes. So those are all the notes that you would imagine in your mind are sustaining through all of the 16ths. And you can even take a little wiggle of time before this pattern starts. And that brings us to our coda, because that's really, in a way, the real ending. And by the way, the 8th note of measure 128, some old editions will print that as a G. It's a strange spot in the manuscript because Bach's note head does not have a slash, a little line through it to make it obviously an A, and yet it's far enough above the staff that it's sitting in the air where an A should be. So I think it really is an A, and I think most people who look at it these days tend to agree that it's actually... But, you know, look at Bach, get used to his handwriting, make your own decision. And then the rest is bonus music. So now we're at the coda, measure 130, and this is all kind of like bonus music to just finish off the movement. Of course, we still have the multiple voices. So make sure that it's really clear that none of those important notes get fluffed, because your open E is just there as filler. And now, at measure 134, we have a hemiola. A hemiola is a big 3 superimposed upon 2 littler 3s. So our movement is in 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the big 3 is going to be counting by half notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and. So then the new 2 is the last beat of the original 3, and then the downbeat of the second 3 is actually just an and, so it's not important at all. And then the most important one is the last big 3, which is the old 2. Makes sense? I'll show you. So this is the old 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. But here's our new big 3. 1, 2, 3. So the bottom voice this one, don't indulge in clunking it, because then that'll get rid of being able to really clearly hear the humulum. And then our final statement. And then here, people, after all his brilliance, are always tempted to want to end boldly. And in fact, a lot of old editions just get rid of these 2 3-note slurs because that makes it not as brilliant. And just kind of do that sort of thing. But in fact, that's not what Bach wrote. And the fact that the 3-note slurs do make it less brilliant is probably telling you that he didn't want it to end huge. So think about how we started the movement a little bit more lightly. I think it ends more elegantly. This is French music. It's not hitting you in the face. So just a nice, like, poof, and off it goes. So if you want to end brilliantly, just play the first movement of Six Sonata No. 2. And that one, you can do the old-fashioned Bach bowing, and it's still there, and you can, get it out of your system. But when you're actually playing Bach, better not to do it. If you're interpreting this movement in a more light, stylish way, then don't, do the last movement in a way that, the last measure in a way that doesn't fit with the rest of the movement. Well, those are some of my thoughts about the Preludio in E major. I'm Rachel Barton Pine, and thank you for watching RBP on JSB.